world was probably pretty shocked by the public exchange between Zelenskyy, Trump, and Vance on 28 February. What began as a civil meeting turned into a screaming match as the American president and vice president attempted to beat down the Ukrainian president.
You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards, but without us, you don't have any cards.
Hi, Catherine here. Let's try and unpack some of what is going on. Our current president is not exactly known for his political acumen. Since the war in Ukraine broke out in 2022, Trump has stated the war never would have happened if he were president. While campaigning, he stated again and again he would immediately end the war. At first, it was before he was in office. Then, within 24 hours of his inauguration.
I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, I would get a settlement in 24 hours.
Well, it has been over a month now, and it looked like he was attempting progress toward ending the war. However, it has been incredibly worrying that his recent take is that Ukraine began the war.
We will continue to be
I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
And only a week before the meeting, he called Zelenskyy a dictator. On the bright side, his attack on the Ukrainian president helped solidify Zelensky's position. Most of Europe has since rallied to say they support Zelenskyy as a democratically elected leader. Even before Trump's meeting with Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian parliament affirmed Zelensky's position as the nation's president. 268 members in parliament that were in attendance, 12 were not present, voted unanimously on a resolution to assert Zelenskyy was the president. And this was meant to show to the world that the Ukrainian government and people stood behind him. Yes, elections were suspended last year when Zelensky's term was supposed to end in May of 2024. While this does not sound normal to many countries in the West, this was not a crime or a mishandling of the law. In Ukraine, when the nation is under martial law, elections are not allowed to be held. The Constitution specifically states in Article 83, if the term of powers of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine expires while martial law or a state of emergency is in effect, its powers shall be extended until the day of the first meeting of the first session of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine elected after the cancellation of martial law or the state of emergency. This country has been under martial law since Russia invaded it in February of 2022. Also note, this article was last amended in February 2014 by then-President Viktor Fedorovich Yanukovych. It was not Zelenskyy who had anything to do with the creation nor the amendment of Article 83. In fact, it was last amended by a pro-Russian president who was incidentally overthrown a day after the article was amended. Zelenskyy did not come to office until 2019 and was only about halfway finished with his 5-year term when martial law was declared, and only in response to Russia invading. No, Zelenskyy is not a dictator. Just because America does not have this article in their constitution does not mean it is not valid in Ukraine. It is easy to tell Zelenskyy to have an election regardless of martial law. Think about it for a moment, though. Think about the logistics. If a nation is under regular attacks with areas being blown up, how can it be expected the public show up to vote? What happens if the polling stations are attacked after people are finished voting? Are all their votes invalidated, so the only places which are not attacked have votes counted? Whole areas get attacked in Ukraine currently. This means people sending in ballots through the mail could also have their votes destroyed as the postal vehicle is in the line of attack. This environment also has the very real possibility of election fraud. Polling stations could be targeted in regions to skew the results. What about the areas currently under Russian occupation? Do you really think people who would vote for Zelenskyy would feel safe doing so with Russians looking over their shoulder? It is very clear why the elections have not been held. Even the opposition recently agreed not to hold elections at this time. There is general support all around. This is a bad idea at the moment. This is also not unheard of in the West. In World War I, Canada and the UK delayed elections. While it could be argued that the UK was under attack during the war and it was not a safe environment to hold elections, Canada, like America, was nowhere near the front line. In World War II, New Zealand and the UK postponed elections. Heck, the UK did not hold elections between 1940 and 45. 5 years. Yes, America held normal elections during both wars, but it did not decry the UK for not doing the same. Winston Churchill was lauded as a hero and not attacked for daring to stay in government for 5 extra years. You know, Winston Churchill, the bust that's now back in the Oval Office. How is Ukraine any different? Regardless of the personal attacks by Trump towards Zelenskyy, Zelenskyy agreed to meet with Trump and discuss and sign a mineral deal. Even after the debacle at the White House, Zelenskyy has still said he is willing to work with America. He has pointed out there needs to be either some path to NATO or, if not, at least some security for Ukraine after a ceasefire has been signed.
Нам потрібен саме мир, справжній, чесний, а не війна, нескінченна. І гарантії безпеки потрібні.
Heck, at one point, Zelenskyy even offered to step down as president if NATO discussions could be held.
Якщо мир для України, якщо вам дуже
If it's about peace in Ukraine and you really want me to leave my position, I am ready to do that. Or I can exchange it for NATO membership if there's the opportunity. I'll do it immediately, without a long conversation about it.
This has been ignored. Instead, Zelenskyy was invited to sign a mineral agreement in which Ukraine would provide America with rare earths as repayment for military aid, which was already given without demands for payment. However, the deal did not guarantee security forces in Ukraine. Trump stated again and again, if there are Americans working in Ukraine, that would be enough. Russia's not going to attack where Americans are working.
You know, we have security in a different form. We'll have workers there digging, taking the raw earth so that we can create a lot of great product in this country. So in that sense, you have something.
Funny, because there were Americans living and working in Ukraine, and yet it still got attacked. As for the meeting with Zelenskyy, I went back through the public meetings with France's President Macron and the UK's Prime Minister Starmer. Through most of the meeting with Macron and Trump, questions were asked and answered in English and French. The only two who answered questions were Trump and Macron, except for one comment at the beginning when Trump asked the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, how close they were to a mineral deal.
With the Ukrainians, I think I can say that we're very close. Scott's around here someplace, and I think we can say that we're very, hi Scott, I think we're very close. Do you have something to say about that, Scott?
We are very close.
Good.
1 yard line.
All right, good.
Toward the end of the meeting, a reporter pushed the question about how it was allowed for Europe to use proceeds from frozen Russian assets to give to Ukraine. Macron explained that the assets were not touched and would be available for negotiation after the war, but any proceeds from the assets were in a different category and could be used for Ukraine. This was part of the EU-agreed sanctions on Russia.
This war costed all of us a lot of money. And this is the responsibility of Russia, because the aggressor is Russia.
When the reporter further asked if France would support the US being compensated for the war, Macron explained that, first, Ukraine should be compensated. It was Ukraine who lost much from the war, and reiterated that Russia would have to pay since they were the aggressors in the war. Please note, Macron made it very clear Russia started the war and was the aggressor through all of this.
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated, because they are the ones to have lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for could be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
Trump jumped in at that point and tried to clarify that Europe loaned Ukraine the money for the war. Macron then interrupted and stated Europe paid 60% of the total cost of the war through loans, guarantees, grants, etc. He further stated if during negotiations Russia gives the frozen assets to Europe, then it would pay off the loans. Trump blew off Macron's words and questioned the believability of that statement. He then reiterated that Europe would get its money back and America would not.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money.
If you
This is my
believe
wish.
that, it's okay with me.
Mr. President,
But they get their money back, we don't, and now we do. But, you know, that's
We
only
will fight
fair.
both.
Macron did not agree with Trump. He even reached out and stopped him and corrected him on a statement. Also note, Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio were sitting next to Trump through all of this. They never spoke up. They were silent the whole time. This shows Macron could correct Trump and push the point Russia was the aggressor without repercussions. Only a few days later, Trump and Prime Minister Starmer had a similar meeting with the press. Trump reiterated his claim that America paid about $350 billion for the war in Ukraine while Europe paid far less. Starmer interrupted and stated the UK was not getting all of their money back and that quite a lot of it was gifted, with only some loans.
We're not getting all of ours. I mean, quite a bit of ours was gifted. It was given. There were some loans, but mainly it was gifted, actually.
It has been pointed out again and again, America has not contributed $350 billion to the Ukraine war. America has contributed about $180 billion. The total cost of the war is estimated around $350 billion. However, Trump and his loyalists have continued to push this lie to exaggerate the price America paid. This is typical in the Trump administration and has been seen with Trump and Musk when they inflate numbers to make voter fraud, government waste, etc. seem far larger than it is. It fits the narrative they are trying to sell the American public. It is not, however, the truth. More power to Macron and Starmer for attempting to correct Trump. Vance was invited into the conversation at one point when a reporter asked about his comments claiming free speech was violated in the UK at the security conference back in Munich. Vance stated there were infringements on British free speech and also infringements on American companies, which in turn affects American citizens. Starmer rebutted that the UK has had free speech for a long time and will continue to do so. That was all. There was no pushback from Vance on this topic and the press moved on. I am pointing out Vance's involvement in the conversation at this point because this will be a bigger issue later. Now, let's go over the meeting with Trump and Zelenskyy. The meeting began very civilly between the two presidents. Trump, like in many other public statements and meetings, took time to attack Biden as allowing the war in Ukraine to happen and how he never would have allowed the war to happen if he were president at the time. Aside from that, his opening statements were focused more on ending the war and all the rare earth minerals America could get access to. They were going to dig. Zelenskyy thanked Trump for having him in the White House and explained that he hoped America would support Ukraine through everything. He mentioned the need for security guarantees and stated he knew what Europe planned to do. His whole focus in the beginning was on what he hoped to discuss with Trump when they went into the private meeting. Yes, he did point out Putin was a terrorist and killer. He was not scathing, but simply mentioned this in the context that he wanted to know his country would be safe from Putin in the future. Zelenskyy brought up the desire to bring back the children who were kidnapped by Russia. This has been in the news time and time again. This is not disputed. He pointed out the need to get back their soldiers. Soldiers have been captured on both sides. Zelenskyy shared photos of the prisoners in Russia. Trump agreed to see the photos when Zelenskyy asked him. He also acknowledged the plan to discuss the release of prisoners later. Yes, Zelenskyy pulled at the heartstrings and appealed for America to help make things right. And unfortunately, this is not Trump's method. Zelenskyy politely contradicted Trump's rhetoric that the US gave far more support than Europe. Trump laughed it off, ha 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 ha. But he did tell Zelenskyy, don't argue with me.
They really gave a lot, Mr. President.
They did.
Really, they did.
They gave a lot, but they gave much less.
No,
Much less.
no, no,
Don't argue with it.
no.
Okay.
Zelenskyy, in turn, pleasantly disagreed and then let it drop. He did point out that Putin could not be trusted and had broken his own ceasefire 25 times. He had provided Trump with a list of each instance a few days before their meeting. Unfortunately, we do not have this particular list available, but scholars who deal with this topic full-time and past diplomats are in agreement. Putin constantly violates deals he makes. Folks, there are experts who have devoted at this point decades to following Putin and Russia's political behavior. They are saying Putin cannot be trusted to maintain his side in a ceasefire. They are saying if Zelenskyy capitulates and simply signs a ceasefire with no guarantees, Ukraine is screwed. Putin will see this as weakness and take the time to regroup and attack stronger. Without America's support, Ukraine has a very good chance of being overrun. Around the 34-minute mark, a reporter asked how UK Prime Minister Starmer could be a reliable, trustworthy partner to America after arresting people for memes and thought crimes, as well as taking American companies to court. First of all, the very question was asked to antagonize and to pander to Trump. Then, Rubio and Vance, they reiterated their support of Americans' free speech online. This is a side note, but these claims about Starmer arresting people for memes and thought crimes, sorry, they're false. This is a misrepresentation of UK police arresting people right now for writing posts online which push rape, sexual assault, violence. This has been twisted by certain media and individuals to cry that free speech is being curbed. There's a very clear difference between free speech and what you're not allowed to say. Same as in America, if you cry fire in the middle of a crowded movie theater or middle of a crowded public space and there is no fire, you will be arrested. It's not free speech at that point. It's a danger. I made this detour to also note this is the only time Vance was invited to enter the conversation. Up to this point, it was solely between Trump and Zelenskyy. This was the same as when Starmer was in the Oval Office. Vance was invited to speak, which made sense on the topic, since it was he who put forth accusations of curbing free speech at the Munich conference. That is all. That should have been the end of it. Around the 39-minute mark, Vance once again interjected, only he was not invited this time. Trump had just stated he could be tough on Putin, but that would never get a deal done. Vance took over the conversation and pointed out how Biden, for 4 years, postured, but never made any progress. Now, America wanted to try diplomacy. This is false. Biden did attempt diplomacy. It got to the point where Putin refused to talk with Biden. When the aggressor refuses to work through diplomatic channels, what can you do? Well, the next step is to put pressure on them. This came through numerous sanctions. Even after sanctions were enacted, Biden still attempted diplomacy with Putin, but was ignored. As for the meeting when it went off the rails, in response to Vance's claim it was time for diplomacy, Zelenskyy asked a very valid question. He wanted to know what diplomacy? What diplomacy would work to deal with Putin?
I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
In 2019, when Trump was in office, Zelenskyy signed a ceasefire with Putin against the advice of Macron and then Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel. This brand new to office, President Zelenskyy met with Putin and signed a ceasefire. Prisoners were exchanged, and the plan was to continue talks from there. Instead, 3 years later, Putin again invaded in 2022. Where were Trump's great deals in all of this? It was France and Germany who sat in and oversaw the ceasefire in 2019. Trump was never a part of this. At this point, America did not intervene. For daring to question Trump's deal, for daring to point out Putin has proven again and again to be unreliable, Vance and then Trump exploded at Zelenskyy. Vance posited America as Ukraine's savior. He berated Zelenskyy as ungrateful for all America has done. Vance made claims that Zelenskyy was forcing conscripts to the front lines. Zelenskyy asked Vance, had he ever been to the Ukraine? Could he confirm these claims?
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories.
That was one lie Vance stopped himself at. He did noticeably trip over his words, but that was one lie far too easy to refute, so he stumbled and said instead he saw the news stories. This is coming from a politician who supports Trump's claims of fake news. How does he know what he follows was not propaganda against Ukraine when he accused Zelenskyy just a moment before of using propaganda? When Zelenskyy tried to address all the questions he was bombarded with, and he said, "Can I answer these?" And he was told yes. Well, then he was attacked. He dared to point out what is happening in Ukraine will eventually reach American shores. That was the turning point for Trump. He did not want Zelenskyy to point to what is quite frankly the truth. What has been the truth for over a century. When a large-scale war occurs in Europe, no matter how long America tries to remain isolated, America is dragged in. Zelenskyy was not saying there would be fighting on American soil or the country would be overrun. He was saying America would feel the war in the end. Look at World War I. America refused to get involved officially. Then the Lusitania was sunk by the Germans. America was pulled into the war. World War II again. America attempted to remain isolated. Nope. Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese and America was pulled into the war. Okay, after 2 world wars where America was on the winning side, then they stayed out of problems in Europe, right? Nope. After World War II, the Soviet Union grabbed up more countries and placed them behind the Iron Curtain. This placed America in a Cold War for over 40 years. America's involvement in the Korean War and Vietnam was an attempt to spread the stop of communist control. This worked somewhat in Korea by keeping the country split into 2 separate nations, the North Communist and the South not. However, it has been in a ceasefire for over 60 years now with constant jabs made by North Korea against the South. When I was over there with my ex-husband who was stationed there in the army, we had to go through twice a year this family readiness thing with our packets to say and show our gas masks and everything else to say that we could be kicked or we could be evacuated from the country immediately because all our documents were in order if the North Koreans came over the line. It was still considered a war zone, just a quiet, peaceful war zone at the moment. Vietnam. This did not end as nicely. Instead, America pulled out of the war when Saigon fell, and the country officially became communist and is technically communist to this day. Zelenskyy is absolutely correct. America will feel it if Ukraine falls to Putin. Ukraine is the largest holdout against Russia right now in Europe, or particularly Eastern Europe. If they fall, the rest of the old USSR, not currently in NATO, sorry, they're too weak to hold out, and they have already been under attack, like Georgia, by Russia. Poland is in NATO, thus not touched at the moment. However, there is the very real concern. If Putin recreates enough of the old USSR, Poland will be the next target, along with Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, all the Baltic states that Trump obviously wasn't sure what Baltic states were.
What about the Baltics?
The Baltics, they got a lot of, it's a tough neighborhood too.
Vance played into Trump's pride and stated Zelenskyy was disrespectful and kept arguing Zelenskyy never said thank you. When Zelenskyy called him out on this and pointed out he had said thank you many times to America, Vance claimed, well, he never said thank you at that current meeting. Where was Vance through this whole meeting? What about?
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you for invitation. I wanted to show you and this, so thank you very much.
Vance then played again to Trump's pride by claiming Zelenskyy campaigned for the opposition. Ooh, that's a nice thorn in the side. This ties in with Trump's rhetoric since he got back into office. He has been on a path of revenge against those he feels wronged him for not being on his side. Zelenskyy never campaigned for Biden or Harris. What did happen was Zelenskyy went with Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who is not running for election, to Scranton, Pennsylvania ammunition plant to thank the workers for all they did providing ammunition for Ukraine.
I want to be the president here to thank you wholeheartedly for saving millions of Ukrainians.
Again, this is not campaigning for the opposition, but it antagonizes Trump to join in with berating Zelenskyy. Trump jumped in on this and made it very clear he would no longer listen to Zelenskyy. Conversation's over. We're done talking. Problem is, he never listened to begin with. He had gone out of his way to call Zelenskyy a dictator. He claimed Ukraine started the war, though everyone who does not fall for Russian propaganda sees very clearly that Russia began the war. Europe stands behind Zelenskyy in this fact. Many of Europe's leaders attended the security summit, which Starmer hailed as creating a coalition of the willing, countries who are going to work together in this case to help Ukraine. At the same time, Trump has stopped all military aid to Ukraine. This includes any aid already approved that was supposed to be sent out. Now Ukraine is left high and dry in terms of American aid because Zelenskyy dared to argue Putin could not be trusted and he wanted to see U.S. security as part of the deal to a ceasefire. U.S. has also stopped any sharing of intelligence. Could claim, potentially, that stopping the aid saves money. And that's really big on Trump's list right now, is saving money for the American public. And that's what he argued again and again. America doesn't want to keep paying for this. Okay, cool. What about stopping sharing security intelligence? That does not cost America any extra money. America does this anyway. We watch everybody. We watch people that we're friends with. A few years ago, or a number of years ago, it got very big in the news during Obama's administration that military bases or military intel inside of Germany was spying on Germany. That did not go down well. So of course we're watching what's still going on, or of course we're still watching what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. So we have the intel. It doesn't take much to share it. Okay, we're cutting Ukraine off because Trump has an issue. Now comes the spin. It was Zelensky's fault for picking a fight. You know, just like he started the war against Russia. Vance on Fox News tried to respin his attacks as a diplomatic attempt to rein in the argument and have talks in private.
What I tried to do originally was actually try to diffuse the situation a little bit, because I'm like, we're having this meeting. Obviously, there are 100 television cameras here. Let's try to have this conversation in private.
Yet anyone who actually watches the meeting in the Oval Office can clearly see this was not the case. He then went on to contradict Trump's claims that America is still willing to work with Zelenskyy. Vance agreed that Zelenskyy tried to meet again with Trump after the debacle in the Oval Office, but the requests were denied. According to Vance, Europeans will not continue to support Zelenskyy either, even though all the meetings that Zelenskyy has had just after that Oval Office meeting here in Europe speak to the contrary. This one really gets me. I love how Vance, who has never lived outside America, feels like he can constantly talk for Europeans, Ukrainians, and point out to the European governments how the people are against their curbing of free speech. I've lived in Germany for nearly 30 years. I am married to a German. I have European friends. My best friend is not an American. I have close American friends, but my best friend is a European. Many of the people I interact with socially are Europeans. Guess what? None of them support Trump's actions, but they do support Zelenskyy. I sat with my husband and asked about his Ukrainian friends. These are people he has known for over 10 years who are living in the Ukraine, including many in the areas which are under attack. They have come out in full support of Zelenskyy after Trump called him a dictator. They have again come out in full support after the debacle at the Oval Office. These are the people who are being attacked. These are the people who are losing their friends, their families, their homes to war. Yet they are not ready to trust Putin will keep to this ceasefire when he has made it clear through past actions he does not respect ceasefires with Ukraine. One of my children is in a class made up of mostly Ukrainian immigrants. There is no love lost for Putin. Period. There is also the very real concern Putin does not even regard Ukraine as an independent nation. According to him, it was the construct of 19th century elites, as he stated in an essay he published back in 2021, the year before he attacked Ukraine. At the same time, the idea of Ukrainian people as a nation separate from the Russians started to form and gain ground among the Polish elite and a part of the Belarusian intelligentsia. Since there was no historical basis and could not have been any, conclusions were substantiated by all sorts of concoctions, which went as far to claim that the Ukrainians are the true Slavs and the Russians, the Muscovites, are not. Such hypotheses became increasingly used for political purposes as a tool of rivalry between European states. Trump also went on about the hoax he and Putin suffered together under Biden, both in the meeting with Starmer and the meeting with Zelenskyy, claiming Putin went through a witch hunt. This goes back to 2019 when the then new president of Ukraine, Zelenskyy, was called by Trump to congratulate him on winning the Ukrainian elections. This is lovely. This is kind of what world leaders do every time there's a presidential or leader election. That's standard fare. It's what they're expected to do. However, the call did not stop there. Trump went on to ask Zelenskyy to open an investigation into business that Hunter Biden conducted in Ukraine. In the transcripts of the call, which are available on the linked sources pages in the description below, Zelenskyy agreed to look into it. He did. He's brand new. The call came after Trump blocked the release of military aid to Ukraine. So you have Zelenskyy. He's brand new. And he suddenly doesn't have aid to Ukraine from the US. Of course he's going to agree to this. Trump pressured Zelenskyy to investigate the son of his opponent by withholding military aid. It is not allowed to ask foreign governments to help with elections in America. Yet Trump overstepped this line. Yes, Trump did not specifically ask for help in the election, but aid in attacking his opponent's son could seriously skew the election results. Then Zelenskyy did the wrong thing in the eyes of Trump. Ukrainian authorities stated there was no evidence of wrongdoing by Hunter Biden. This was a large component in the impeachment process against Trump. Trump remembers this. Doesn't remember a lot of things, but he remembers this. Back in 2018 in the G7 summit, Trump reportedly sided with Russia over Crimea. A diplomatic source stated Trump told other world leaders at a dinner, Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and wondered why leaders sided with them over Russia. At the same summit, he argued Russia should be let back into the G8 and be part of future summits after being thrown out. Back in 2016, leading up to elections, Trump called on Russia to dig up emails on Hillary Clinton. For a long time now, Trump has seen Putin and Russia as his ally or a useful tool, not as a threat. As for the supposed pain Putin went through over the Biden case, Putin did not suffer for it, not at all. Putin was not taken to court like Trump. Yes, in March 2023, the International Criminal Court placed a warrant for the arrest of Putin and other Russian leaders for their war in Ukraine. However, only 122 countries are members of the ICC. There are currently 195 recognized countries in the world. That means 73 countries do not recognize the arrest warrant. Since the warrant was placed, Putin visited Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, North Korea, and is supposedly going to meet with Trump in Saudi Arabia. None of these countries are part of the ICC. He even visited Mongolia, which is part of the ICC. Putin is not hiding in a bunker avoiding arrest. He is not personally suffering anything. He is wealthy beyond means. He has control over his country. He's not suffering. Trump has a very convoluted perception of the world. The fact that Trump has sided with Putin in a number of instances is worrying. This is further supported by Russia's Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, stating America is aligning with Russia's vision in foreign policy. Here's the deal. For those who are reposting news reports that Trump put Zelenskyy in his place, did you actually watch the meeting in the Oval Office? I do not mean clips of it as replayed in snippets on news programs, so it's taken out of context, or the responses by political pundits. I'm not even asking you to blindly believe what I say. I'm asking you to watch the actual meeting. If you haven't, then do so. Watch it with open ears. Listen to every word these men say. Look at their body language and really pay attention. Critically analyze. Do not just blindly believe. For those of you who support Trump's claims that Zelenskyy is a dictator, do you know any Ukrainians currently living in the Ukraine and have talked with them? I do not mean Americans who have Ukrainian ancestors. We love to say, oh, I'm this, I'm that from different nations. But we're Americans, and we've lived in America. I do not mean Ukrainians who left after the fall of the Iron Curtain back in the 90s and have been in America for decades. I do not mean you watch someone online who claimed to be Ukrainian and is spouting pro-Russia propaganda. I'm talking about Ukrainians who are currently living in the Ukraine. Talk to them personally, if you can, and ask them what they think about Zelenskyy and Putin. These are the people who know best, not some American politicians who have no interaction with them. In Europe, we see some of the effects of the war while still being pretty sheltered. Americans are very isolated. It is easy to follow a loud figure who talks big, who has no experience with hard times and makes lots of easy promises. Instead, talk to people who actually experience these difficulties. Talk to the people who live around them. Maybe, just maybe, the people of Europe, and more importantly, the people of the Ukraine, know far better what is happening and who they stand behind. Trump said again and again, Zelenskyy is risking World War III. No one wants to see a third world war. The risks, based on the weapons available, are too high. Zelenskyy does not want this, and nor does Putin. Putin does not want to see his country blown up. Zelenskyy wants to see freedom and peace in his nation. Putin wants to win a land grab. World War III would bring none of this. Everyone is clear on this. Rather than bluster and berate and accuse, maybe it is time for the US government to support Ukraine and help bring true peace that does not enable Putin to regroup and go back for another round to claim more land in Ukraine. He's already on round 2. Do we need a round 3? All the Republican lawmakers who are quick to turn their backs on Zelenskyy and blindly support Trump, they need to stand up and they need to push back against Trump. The Democrats need to step up and rally for the right decisions to be made. You, as the public, as the voters, you have a voice in this. I am again listing a link below on how to write your representatives and senators. Do so. I am still working on a Google Doc with all this information. It's taking quite a while because I'm going senator by senator, representative by representative, state by state, and a lot of the representatives have multiple offices, so just copying and pasting is taking a while. And quite frankly, some of them I really have to dig because they'd rather you email. While it may cost a bit for the stamps, hit them with actual letters through the post. Emails are easily deleted, even if they flood the servers for a bit. Physical letters overwhelming office staff are not so easily ignored. I am also trying to work on a template letter which could be tweaked, and we'll add this as well to future videos, or at least the link to it. We can make a change. It is only up to you to shape your future.